besides the presentation you worked on, of course.
For life.
Okay, lovely, lovely. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you today on this first ever inaugural session of Martha Root. We welcome Miss Violetta Zane. Ms. Violetta Zane has worked tirelessly, hundreds, thousands of hours, and she's still working right now as we speak on this beautiful presentation. With that said, we welcome you all as we are posting this online, streaming for the first time. Today's date is September 28th, 2025. We're starting and continuing this session every Sunday at 11 a.m. We welcome you to share this with your friends. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube or Facebook, we welcome you to join us on Zoom. You can join directly, and we're going to tell you in a moment how. But first, let's introduce you to Miss Violetta Zane. So, on behalf of the Baha'is of Clearwater, we thank and welcome Miss Violetta Zane. She's an artist, a graphic designer. She's living in Pointe Noire. She is also a researcher, a writer, a presenter, specializing in Baha'i history. And this has given her over, let's see, she's given over 150 talks. That is quite amazing. And you can find all of these 150 plus talks on YouTube right now as we speak. Furthermore, The Life of Martha Root will be Violetta's seventh, her seventh series with the Clearwater Baha'is YouTube channel after the lives of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, Abdul Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and the Greatest Holy Leaf.
And the Storytelling Sundays. That's why it makes 7.
Yes, and the Storytelling Sundays. And let me tell you, those Storytelling Sundays, they are so unique. I mean, if you've never heard of Haji Mirza Hyder Ali, you all have to learn about this guy.
Oh, amazing.
Yes. So her new website to find these chronologies, it is www.bahaichronologies.com, where you can find all of her work in English and in French. And you can see it's posted here in the Zoom chat, www.bahaichronologies.com. So we lastly want to welcome Ms. Violetta Zane. Those of you who are wanting to join the Zoom, please visit clearwaterbaha'is.org, where we are posting the sessions under activities and events. On the 11 a.m. session, you can join that way by clicking on the Zoom join link. And furthermore, just scrolling down the homepage, you'll find a Zoom icon where you can, of course, click on that too. Without much further ado, welcome Violetta. On behalf of the Baha'is of Clearwater, Florida, we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone is watching this on YouTube and you want more information about the website, about how to join live Zooms, you can leave a comment on YouTube and I'll respond. Now, I'm going to share my screen. I am very, very happy today. I have been waiting for this for a year. I've been working on Martha Root for more than a year. Welcome to Martha Root. Part 1, Calling. But before we start, I have a little bit of an introduction. Chapter 1, who was Martha Root? Exactly 86 years ago today, on September 28th, 1939, Martha Root, one of the most thrilling figures of the first Baha'i century, passed away. 4 days later, Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, elevated Martha to the immortal rank of Hand of the Cause. Martha Root was a well-known and respected journalist. She was a brilliant speaker, a prolific writer, and a tireless teacher who traveled to at least 76 countries on 6 continents over the course of 6 journeys between 1915 and 1939. Martha's travels for the Baha'i faith in Europe, Asia, North America, South America, Oceania, and Africa amount to an estimated 442,000 kilometers or 275,000 miles, roughly the distance equivalent of circling the Earth 11 times. Martha Root was the first Baha'i, the first person to bring the Baha'i faith in 21 countries. Martha Root did this for 2 decades, completely alone, without rest, without comfort, without enough books, without decent food, without enough pamphlets, without enough money, sometimes in great danger, and despite a body that was prone to both illnesses and cancer, which makes her achievements even more awe-inspiring. And today, we begin a celebration in 13 parts of the fascinating life of Martha Root. Chapter 2, Martha Root's Ancestors. The Root family history. Charles Root, Martha's ancestor, sailed from England in 1640 and arrived in America with 2 of his 4 brothers. They left England 2 years before the start of the English Civil War. Martha's grandfather, Sylvester Root, bought land in a borough in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania and became one of the first 2 families to settle the area. The Roots were a hardworking family, and they included farmers, weavers, and tanners, but they also cared deeply about social welfare. Sylvester and his brother Daniel Root both had large families, and they developed and cleared this area in Pennsylvania, which was first known as Cambridgeboro and then later as Cambridge Springs. Martha's father, Timothy Root, was one of Sylvester's 8 children. Now, I couldn't find any pictures of these ancestors, but I did find a census from 1870, which lists in blue the family of Sylvester Root, Martha's paternal grandfather, here. And then in pink is Timothy Root, T.T. Root, and at the time he was just married to Nancy and had a son, Clarence, Martha's older brother. And in yellow is Daniel Root, the brother of Timothy. Other members of the family, the Root family, settled closer to the Buffalo, New York area, and this was this branch of the family that produced the most famous member of the Root family, Elihu Root. Elihu Root was the Secretary of War under President McKinley and also the Secretary of War during President Roosevelt. Then he was Secretary of State under President Roosevelt, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1912. That's his certificate right there. During Martha Root's travels, peoples would sometimes either tell Martha that they had known Elihu Root or hosted Elihu Root, or they would bring him up. Chapter 4, The Consummate Adventurer is Born. The birth of Martha Root. While they were briefly living in Richwood, Ohio, T.T. Root and Nancy's 3rd child, a daughter, was born on August 10th, 1872. Her name was listed on her birth certificate as Mattie, M-A-T-T-I-E. And she would go exclusively as Mattie for the first 22 years of her life, until 1889, when she enrolled in Oberlin and her name changed to Martha Louise Root. Soon after Mattie's birth, the Root family returned to Cambridge Springs. Mattie grew up in a beautiful, roomy Victorian home. This is a photograph of Martha's childhood home. Mattie's large windows overlooked beautiful meadows and fields that were dotted with barns and cows and horses. Mattie had 2 older brothers, Clarence, who was 3 years older than her, and Claude, who was only a year older. Cambridge Springs, which you see here, and its various and its spacious Victorian home were where Mattie would spend a very happy childhood and grow into a young woman from elementary school until the time she left for university. Cambridge Springs was her home, and she very much part of her identity before she became a Baha'i. I want to tell you a little bit about the historical context of when Martha Root was born, because Martha Root marked Baha'i history. So I want to talk about the history of the country that she was born in, because she was born at a very interesting time. This is the American flag with 37 stars. This was the flag when Martha Root was born in 1872. This was an exciting time. It was immediately after the Reconstruction era, which followed the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. It was called the Gilded Age. And it was called the Gilded Age from that novel by Mark Twain. And it was named that by historians in the 1920s. But that's why we call it the Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age is a period of 20 years from the 1870s to the 1890s. That were dominated by many different forces. The United States was rapidly expanding its economy into new areas, especially heavy industry like factories, railroads, oil, coal mines. It was undergoing a revolution in transport, a rise in immigration and industrialization. It was dealing with the aftermath and the legal, social, and political challenges of both abolishing slavery and reintegrating the 11 former Confederate states of America into the United States. 5 months before Mattie was born, on March 1st, 1872, Yellowstone became the first national park in the entire world. And 3 months later, 2 months before Mattie was born, after Mattie was born, on the 5th of November, 1872, Susan B. Anthony, who you see here, became the first woman to vote before women were granted the right. And she was arrested and fined, and women's suffrage was huge in those decades. In 1872, the United States was prosperous, and Americans were filled with hope. A lot of interesting things were happening, like the first Black senators and representatives on this beautiful engraving. They were elected in 1879, 1869, and 1871. There was a great sense of possible in the United States at that time. There was great vitality in America, but the country was also searching for its identity and answers on questions of race, women, democracy, progress. It was a time when electricity had not yet arrived. So most homes either used oil or gas. People either walked or rode on horses and in carriages, no cars yet, although they slowly began appearing. And steamships traveled to and from the United States with immigrants, businessmen, and tourists. Chapter 4, Mattie's childhood. Nancy Root, Mattie's mother. Mattie was raised in a typical rural American family atmosphere. Her mother kept a sparkling house and was an excellent cook, and she also knitted, mended, sewed, and embroidered. This photograph and the next photograph of our 19th century women in 19th century American homes, they're not pictures of Martha Root, of Nancy Root. The Root family, throughout Mattie's childhood, entertained a lot, and both their many relatives and friends were happy to spend time in their homes. Now, of course, Mattie adored her mother and was very close to her and loved her sense of fun. But her deepest bond, her most profound relationship, was with her father, T.T. Root. T.T., and this is the only picture we have of T.T. Root, so I'm going to use it a lot. T.T. Root was an entrepreneur, and he ran a dairy farm, a cheese factory, and a marble works, and a lumber business. He built and sold many houses, and he was one of the promoters of the famous Riverside Hotel in Cambridge Springs, which is still open today. But T.T. Root was also a very, very good fisherman. This is called a muskie, a muskellunge. It's an American fish, a river fish, I think. The biggest fish that he ever caught was 137 centimeters long, 54 inches, and it weighed 19 kilograms, 41 pounds. And guess what? I found articles about Timothy Root and his fish. So this is an article talking about T.T. Root's record. He set a record. Of course, there have been bigger fish since then. And then this is actually published in the fishing magazine called Field and Stream, and he won 5th prize. But he was such a good fisherman that actually these are 3 other newspaper articles that talk about him going fishing and going on a fishing trip. And once he caught 101 trout in one day. Very cool. But T.T. was also the deacon in the Baptist church, like his father before him, and his opinions carried a great deal of weight in the community in Cambridge Springs. He was very, very well respected. T.T. Root was a man of few words. He was incapable, according to Martha Root, he was incapable of small talk. But he had the ability to speak meaningfully, and he had a talent for dispute resolution in Cambridge Springs that mended friendships and saved lawyers' fees. T.T. Root had a wonderful attitude to life, and it left a mark on his daughter because she inherited that trait. This is what Martha said in later years about her father. God gave him the big gift of humor and the tact to laugh off the agreeable side of things. Everybody has troubles, but Father, he never has any. I want you to remember that because Martha is going to laugh in this series when she falls down and hurts her head and bleeds from her scalp. She will laugh when she slips. She will laugh when something bad happens. She really inherited that attitude from her father. It's really interesting. Mattie. Now, this is a photograph of Martha as a woman, but it's the youngest looking photograph that I could find that illustrates her description from her childhood, which is that she had golden hair, which later turned a rich brown, and later in life turned gray and white. She had very generous, clearly defined features. She had large blue-gray eyes and a radiant smile. On Saturdays, Mattie's chores as a child and teenagers were to clean the kerosene lamps because there was no electricity and do some ironing. She took piano lessons and she loved sports and parties. One of Martha Root's childhood friends later said about Mattie, she was the most perfect person I have ever known. In the 1890s, when Mattie was growing into a woman herself, women's primary concerns were to marry and start a family. They spent their time with embroidery, cooking, gardening, but Martha would break the mold. This is her right here underneath the greatest name in India in 1938. Chapter 5, High School. Cambridge Borough High School. At 17, Martha Root, so Mattie, graduated from high school on the 13th of June, 1889. She had an enormous, very grandly decorated diploma listing the courses she had taken. Reading, writing, orthography, grammar, literature, rhetoric, Latin, philosophy, mental arithmetic, written arithmetic, algebra, geometry, bookkeeping, American history, general history, civil government, geography, physical geography, physiology and hygiene, and the theory of teaching. Now, this is very exceptional because that is an excellent education. She is very well-rounded, learned about so many different subjects, and then she starts something she is never going to stop doing. She travels to Europe. From a very early age, Martha had no interest in the domestic side of life. She did not like sewing, knitting, or cooking. Martha loved the literary world of books, reading, and writing. Her insatiable mind yearned to discover what she didn't know. And by the time she was 14 years old, Martha had saved enough money from her writing to visit the breathtaking and spectacular Niagara Falls. Her path of seeing and discovering the world and being amazed by the world around her had been set at a very early stage in life, and she would never stray from it. Right after graduating from high school in the summer of 1889, Mattie traveled to Europe for the first time. Although we don't have any information on the length of her trip or where in Europe she traveled, it's really important to remember that she started traveling very young. She was 14 when she went to Niagara Falls, and then she was 17 when she traveled to Europe for the first time. There would be 4 trips to Europe before Martha began traveling for the faith. Chapter 6, University. An outstanding education. It was very rare for women in 1889 to study past high school. In fact, even most men did not go beyond high school. And in fact, Martha's 2 brothers, Clarence and Claude, did not want to go to university. Clarence opened a butcher shop. These are butchers in the early 1900s. And Claude went into real estate and insurance. But no, not Martha. Martha wanted more. There are no exact numbers of women who were college age in 1899, but because there were 31 million women in America, several million women were of the age to go to college. And out of those several million, only 56,000 were enrolled in universities in 1889. Now, it's impossible to know how small that percentage is, but it's between 0.175 and 0.2%, which is clear that Mattie was part of a very small minority of women privileged enough to access higher education. And Mattie was so brilliant. She didn't just go to university. She purposefully, conscientiously, willingly carved out for herself a unique and outstanding education that prepared her to live an exceptional life. Allegheny College. Now, neither her brothers went to school, but Martha managed to talk her mother and father into going to university, and they finally agreed. But at first, Martha's parents chose to send her to a college called Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania, very close to Cambridge Springs. It was 19 kilometers, 11 miles south of Cambridge Springs. My guess is that TT, her father, loved her so much he did not want her far away. Allegheny College was not what Mattie had in mind. That wasn't her scene. So she was very, very smart and very, very diplomatic. And she approached her beloved father when her mother had gone into town one day. And she sat on his knees and she asked him to let her go to Oberlin College in Ohio, where she could enter debates and speaking contests and story writings if she did not have to come back to Cambridge Springs every weekend. Her father's eyes filled with tears, and before leaving the room, he told Martha, "It is your companionship I was thinking of, but you just choose your college and go wherever you think would be best for you." So she went to Oberlin. She knew what she wanted. You gotta love Martha. Mattie enrolled at the prestigious and very beautiful Oberlin College in Ohio, famous for its high-quality liberal arts degrees. It was an amazing university. Mattie would attend Oberlin for 5 years, from September 1889 until June 1894. And now, name change. In the 1889, 1890, 1891, 1892, 1893, and 1894 and 1895 catalogs for Oberlin, Mattie's name now appears as Martha Louise Root. Now, Martha Louise Root is going to shorten that name to Martha L. Root, and that is how she's going to sign every single one of the thousands of articles she's ever going to write. That will be her name for the rest of her life. Martha's courses. These are all pictures of Oberlin from the Oberlin publication called Hi Ho Hi that the Oberlin University sent me when I asked for them. They sent me all the PDFs, so I managed to get the pictures for you guys. So Martha designed her own course of study. She did it on her own. She loved languages, and she had a language-heavy curriculum. She chose Latin, Greek, French, and German, and she also took English literature, elocution, rhetoric, psychology, mathematics, and the Bible. Everything is literary, pretty much. So now that she has a choice, she's going to study everything she likes. Now, I have to confess, I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce this because it's not a real word in the English language, and I couldn't find any traces of it online. So it's Aeolian. Aeolian. In 1893, Martha integrated the Ladies' Literary Society of Oberlin when she became a member of Aeolian, a distinguished literary society for women. Now, this is a group photograph of the Aeolian Women's Literary Society for the year 1892-1893, and this is Martha Root in the corner here, right? With that dress with a big fluffy collar, but you're going to see her better on the next slide. That's Martha Root. That's the first picture we have of her, and this is a close-up. That's Martha Root in her 20s. Now, the next year, in 1893, 1894, they published another Hi Ho Hi bulletin or book, and she was also in this literary society, Aeolian, which I'm glad I'm not going to have to pronounce more tonight. And now she's in the middle here, but you can see her better here, and this is a close-up with her hair on the top. That's her style. It was a very common style for women at the time. And this is the opening page of the 1895 Hi yearbook, with Martha's name shows up 3 times. She was very active in Oberlin, and this is so important because we are watching the formation of the great Martha Root, like the courses she took, her sense of humor, how active she was in university, how all her courses were literary. All of this plays a role in this great hand of the cause that we know. So again, she was member of Aeolian and she was also the secretary of the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA offices. And she published an essay entitled Links for Life in the Third Society Congress. And in another publication called the Oberlin Review, Martha published an article called Oberlin, a Quiet Place to Study. This is like the beginnings of the journalist, but she hasn't discovered her vocation yet. These are just pictures that I wanted to include because I can. This is a beautiful photo of a tap and walk in Oberlin, very pretty. These are all from the yearbook. This is Warner Hall, the concert hall and music school. And these are male students of Oberlin at the same time as Martha Root. Now, Martha Root had bigger ideas. She didn't want to stay at Oberlin. She transferred to the University of Chicago after 5 years at Oberlin. And she lived in Beecher Hall. So she transferred in 1894, 1895. And she lived in this, the center of this picture here, Beecher Hall, that was her dorm. Martha received her bachelor's degree in 1895. This slide shows Martha Root in the Bible committee the year she graduated. And interestingly enough, even though she had transferred a year ago, an Oberlin publication for 1895 says Martha was an associate editor on the University of Chicago Weekly, another brick in the path to her becoming a journalist. Chapter 7, Changes and Accidents. This is a turning point in Martha's life. Now, Martha has graduated from high school, and she is in her first job as a school principal at this high school, Union City High School. That was Martha launching her first career, the thing that made the most sense, a teacher, an educator, but she was a principal from 1895 to 1897. This is not her school. As part of her administrative duties, Martha was asked to do something that was very hard for her. So she was asked to lead the school in morning prayers, and she found it difficult to do. Later, she would tell a friend, "It is difficult for me to lead I never enter the room without praying, but to lead is difficult. This was a lucky find. I was looking for articles about Martha Root online, and I found this. I love this slide because it's a little snippet in a Pennsylvania newspaper, and it announces that there's going to be a roundtable meeting of principals in Pennsylvania. And Martha, as a principal, was invited, and she went on Saturday, the 20th of February at 9 a.m. The program is really cute. And in pink here is Martha giving a talk called Reading from the Pollard Standpoint. I'm assuming that's a reading method, but I didn't really have much luck finding any information about it. That newspaper clipping is very interesting because Martha was sort of in a cage as a principal. Sorry, there's a cage here. She worked very, very hard. She did the work. She tried very hard to do a good job. And she just wasn't meant to be in a box. She wasn't meant to be an administrator. Martha was independent. She was adventurous. She was curious. She loved travel. She needed to be set free. And she was on the verge of discovering her vocation. Second trip to Europe. Remember, I told you there are 4 trips to Europe before she becomes a Baha'i. This is the second. Martha's second trip to Europe took place from early July to September 1896. She sailed on the Lucania, which you see here. Maybe it's Lusania, but I think it's Lucania. From early July until September 1896 with a group of women on a tour. And guess what? I found information on this one. So the departure of Martha Root and her friends made the newspaper called the Brooklyn Eagle on the 5th of July, 1896. And the article is titled, Through European Capitals. Brooklynites started on the Lucania on an extended tour. Very exciting. So among the passengers on the Cunard line, steamship Lucania, yesterday was a party of 42, nearly all Brooklynites, who started on a tour of the capitals of Europe. They will be absent 2 months and are as follows. Now, the article is long because it lists all 42 women. And at the bottom, it says there's 2 more tours leaving. And it listed the capitals that they were going to. It said Paris, London. It listed the country. It said France, England, Germany, and Switzerland. But because I didn't know if that was also the tour for this one, I didn't include it because I need to be careful what I say. But anyway, what's interesting, regardless of the capitals that she went to, what's really interesting about this is that Martha's destiny is accelerating. When she returns from this trip, you can see the future journalist, because what does she do? She begins telling stories, writing articles, speaking about her 50 days in Europe for the next few years at variable places. And look at what I found. Martha Root, 50 days in Europe. Martha Root, 50 days in Europe. Martha Root, 50 days in Europe. All of these newspaper clippings. There are 7, but if there's 7, that means there's probably 20 because there's a lot of papers from that era that are not digitized. She spoke in Buffalo, in Cleveland, in Chicago. She spoke everywhere about her trip to, okay. So I'm going to try to move more slowly between the images because I received some information that my screen freezes up a little bit. So I'm going to try to, because there's a lot of images and they're kind of heavy, so I'm going to try to take it easy. I'll move more slowly. So in 1896, when Martha was 24 years old, she had an accident that would affect the rest of her life. She was flying down a hill on a bicycle when she hit a stone, flew off the bike, and was seriously injured. Martha was taken to a hospital where they performed a surgery that changed her. The operation rendered Martha sterile, and the experience had a traumatic effect on her. After her accident, Martha would never again trust doctors or hospitals in any country she traveled in and avoided them at all costs until the day she died. She was deeply traumatized, but Martha had that same gift as T.T. Root, and she recovered fully. She was incapable of feeling bitter, and that is an important point to remember about Martha Root. She is incapable of bitterness or mean feelings or grudges. She adjusted to her new reality. Marriage would not be a part of her life because she could not have children. So that was not ever going to be a part of her life. And she decided that consciously. But she had retained, despite the accident, her innate joy for life. She never looked back, and she lived life to its fullest. Chapter 8, Shakespearean reader. We're getting closer to Martha the journalist. Martha becomes well known. By the winter of 1900, Martha had a genius and ambitious idea. Shakespeare was very popular in the early 20th century, and Martha had always been intrigued by his work. So she developed a series of basically one-woman plays based on the works of Shakespeare, like Othello and Romeo and Juliet. And she began performing these one-woman plays in clubs, schools, auditoriums, and churches around the Eastern Seaboard, from Cambridge Springs to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York City. Martha Root, as a Shakespearean reader and lecturer, was a huge and tremendous and wildly successful hit, and tons of newspapers and articles reported on her brilliant performances. And FYI, I am not repeating a single article. Every single article you see on the screen is a unique article about Martha Root and how amazing she is, right? So these are 5, and then just count how many there are. And that's just a fraction of them, just FYI. So Martha performed everywhere. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of newspaper articles, almost all calling her the well-known Shakespearean reader, like you see highlighted here. The Evening Republic of 23rd of December, 1899 had lavish praise for Martha. Now, I am going to repeat this article because the quote is very long. Martha Root's manner is irresistible, and her intelligent apprehension and her rendering of dramatic thought are a welcome gift in this age of elocution and dramatic posing. Miss Root is not an elocutionist, but a born interpreter. And as she peoples her stage with characters of striking individuality, the audience leaves the lecture room with the feeling they have seen the faces, listened to the voices, and touched the faces and lives of these people, real since Shakespeare's day. At the time in 1900, there was a trend to recite Shakespeare in what was called elocution. So it was like exaggerated movements and dramatic speaking and pronunciation that is extreme and taking poses. And Martha did none of that. She just was very toned down. And it was a very welcoming and very refreshing change from the fad that a lot of people did not enjoy. So that's why they say she's not an elocutionist. It's a compliment. And a born interpreter, which means she interpreted Shakespeare for people there. And what was really important about Martha was that she was highly educated. She's like 0.2% of the women that have gone to college at this point. She's graduated college for 10 years. She's traveled twice to Europe. She's very cultured. She's been to the places that are talked about in the plays of Shakespeare, so she can really bring them to life. And the Pittsburgh Post of February 11th, 1900 loved this aspect of Martha's performance and wrote, Miss Root, a graduate of the University of Chicago, is an artist whose work needs only to be known to be appreciated. She never fails to fascinate and interest cultured audiences. Miss Root has masterful command of the subject. Martha didn't just read dialogue from the plays. She analyzed what was happening inside the play, the relationships and the tensions between the characters. She interpreted the meaning of the play, like what did Shakespeare mean with this play? She explained the plot, which was sometimes very confusing, and her commentary wasn't just witty, it was highly intelligent, it was sharp, it was relevant, and it was very appreciated. The Weekly Courier of Connellsville, Pennsylvania, dated 16 February 1900, also praised Martha's work on trying to understand Shakespeare's characters. Her endeavor is to develop the intents and purposes of the bard and the dramatist by explanation and comparison, evolved out of her own conceptions, which are very shrewd and clear. Public speaker. So I'm guiding you on this path to understanding how she became a journalist. And she has performed these Shakespeare plays hundreds of times, often to large crowds, with every seat in the house taken. In February 1900, Martha performed for 400 people at the Carnegie Lecture Hall. In Cambridge Springs, Martha performed as a contribution to her hometown. These early experiences of Martha with both public speaking, writing her own material, and being in the public eye and being well known, these are integral to how she's going to serve the faith in a few years. By the time Martha begins speaking about the faith in crowded rooms and filled amphitheaters, she was already a veteran public speaker. She was already a seasoned and experienced person on the stage. She'd been doing it for 20 years. She'd learned to control and modulate her voice and pitch to speak very clearly. When she started talking on the radio, that would be a huge advantage to people who just began speaking on the radio with no diction, with no enunciation, with no good voice. And she also had a very nice quality of voice that was very clear. Chapter 9, Steel City. Now, I just want to talk about Martha's career in journalism and her productivity. I want to give you a head-spinning idea of what she did. Now, there are 2 videos in this section that are going to show articles that flip by at a very quick speed. So if you have problems with screens that change fast, you should close your eyes, and I'll tell you when to open them. But I just needed to show you how much Martha wrote. First, Steel City. Martha begins a new chapter in her life when she moves to Pittsburgh in 1900. She would live in Pittsburgh, Steel City, for the next 16 years. Pittsburgh was a very exciting city in 1900. Within 10 years, it would be the eighth largest city in America. It was strategically located between the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers, Monongahela rivers, surrounded by coal-rich mountains converging to form the mighty Ohio River. Its location was very strategic, and it attracted ambitious people like Andrew Carnegie and Andrew Mellon, and called out to people who wanted to change the world, like shipbuilders, miners, industrialists, inventors, and bankers. Pittsburgh, a modern city, moving away from America's rural past, was where Martha would discover her vocation. Martha's first article. So Martha's career in newspapers is actually very exciting. So just FYI, Martha does not become a Baha'i today. She becomes a Baha'i next Sunday. So today is just about her becoming who she is. One of Martha's first published stories, was published in May 1901, and it's called Romance in Cambridge Springs. Wasn't able to find it. I was very upset about that. It's the story of a woman who follows her career a few minutes before going through with her wedding. Very excited about that. I hope I find it one day. The local newspaper in Cambridge Springs praised Martha. Miss Root is of a charming personality, and we are proud to call her our Martha. We are proud that Cambridge Springs can boast such talent. Martha had found her calling. She would be writing articles and publishing articles for the rest of her life, nearly 40 years. And this is about Martha's career in newspapers. So keep track, because Martha moves from one paper to another, to another, to another. So keep track. And I tried to get them, all the front pages, to be of the year that Martha worked there. So in 1900, Martha began as a summer replacement for the society editor of the Pittsburgh Chronicle Telegraph until the fall. Then Martha took a job at the Pittsburgh Dispatch, another temporary position. Not long after joining the staff on the Pittsburgh Dispatch, Martha moved to the Pittsburgh Press in January 1901, when she took over the women's page and edited articles of local, national, and international interest. The page was beautifully designed with Martha's name printed prominently. 5 months later, in June 1901, Martha moved again to the Index of Pittsburgh Life, always called the Index. It was a weekly magazine of social happenings in Pittsburgh, and it provided reports on the activities of the wealthy citizens of Pittsburgh. And then I'm going to tell you a whole story, but she became the editor of the Pittsburgh Life automobile section. After the Pittsburgh Life, on the 28th of December, 1902, Martha moved to the Pittsburgh Gazette. From 1902 to 1905, she worked for the Pittsburgh Press, the Pittsburgh Post, the Pittsburgh Dispatch. And by mid-1905, she left the Dispatch and moved to the Pittsburgh Post, where she worked for 6 years, from 1905 to 1911. This is where she would discover the faith. She was the society editor, society and religion editor from 1905 to 1911. And then she was the society editor from 1911 to 1915. And then just before quitting newspapers, she returned to one of her first papers, the Index, and she worked there and eventually became the editor. And she quit on the 10th of December, 1960. Now, in the movie you're about to watch, Martha Root's career, you're going to see 581 newspaper articles written by Martha Root between 1901 and 1916 that I was able to find online. So 581 articles. They're going to go by very fast. These are all papers Martha Root wrote. So exciting. 581 is a low estimate. I'll tell you why. Because there are probably hundreds more articles, because several of the newspapers that Martha wrote during this time that I just showed you are not digitized, like the Chronicle Telegraph. And many of the magazines that she wrote for, especially when she was traveling for the faith, are also not digitized. This is one person's output. It's absolutely amazing, because not just for quality, but for quantity and diversity of subjects. For 15 years, Martha wrote about beautiful Pittsburgh, covered society, reported on major events, traveled around the world, and she sent back inspiring and moving and sometimes very funny stories. I'll get to that also. But the residents of Pittsburgh, for 15 years, Martha Root became a household name. They knew her. Martha Root showed, the way that she wrote just showed what a fascinating person she was, capable of being interested by so many things. And her outlook was so unique. Her writing style was so unmistakable. Her passion was so obvious. Her dedication was so absolute. Her work ethic was so professional that she was just nothing short of an absolute legend. Chapter 10, automobiles. And this is my favorite section. The Index's automobile section. When Martha joined the Index of Pittsburgh Life, the Index, in June 1901, there was an automobile section already, because automobiles were big. They were huge. They were just starting out and everybody was excited. But it was a very humble section. See, it was like just little columns of varying lengths. These articles are from October 1900 to June 1901. I just chose a few of them. I have like all of them because I contacted the Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh, and they allowed me to download all of the issues of the Pittsburgh Index Life. So I've been having fun with this for a few months. So most of these articles just don't have pictures, right? And like this one is an article, but like they cared so little about editing this automobile section that it starts, there's 3 lines on the bottom of one column, and then the article switches for the rest of the, it's like not even properly placed on the page. Now, not to misrepresent it, there were some pictures sometimes. So they're like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. When Martha joins, there's gonna be like 7 pictures per article. So now Martha joins the index. I'm gonna show you what changes when Martha joins. So she lobbied to be the editor, and she did such a phenomenal job. Okay, so the first dedicated automobile section, Martha's dedicated automobile section, starts on issue number 304 of August 3rd, 1901. Look at Martha's hand. It has a title and a subtitle. The Automobile, the Index of Pittsburgh Life, is locally the official organ for motorists. Look at these pictures. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 pictures in one article. That's the opening article for her section. Isn't that amazing? So this is about like modes for motorists, fashion, driving fashions. Such a big deal in the 1900s. Driving fashions was huge. So for the next year, because so this is my favorite part, but it only lasts 1 year in Martha Root's life. but for the next year, the automobile section in the index is going to be super exciting because it's going to have great design, interesting articles, lots of photographs. Sorry, I'm lost. Okay, there you go. So this is her second little movie with Martha Root, and I want to show you her limitless creativity and imagination. These are the topics that Martha Root wrote about. Hospitals using automobiles, women driving cars, the best road to go to Buffalo, automobile patents, automobile fashions, automobile expositions, automobile collectors, automobile engineers, automobile races, automobile accidents, automobile fatalities, the post office and stores using automobiles for deliveries, automobile clubs, the automobile savings banks, the latest and newest automobile models, poems about automobiles, automobiles built in Pittsburgh, automobiles built in Europe, skilled automobile drivers, electric versus steam versus gas-powered engined automobiles, and on and on and on. On November 22nd, 1902, Martha wrote her last article for the Index of Pittsburgh Life on Hohenberg, the country home of Mr. and Mrs. Boggs. So she didn't only write about cars, she also wrote large features, and then she moved on to the Pittsburgh Gazette. But I want to just boast about Martha for just 1 second. So this is Martha's headlines during the year that she was the automobile editor. You know what happened to the Automobile Index dedicated automobile section after Martha left? It died. The next session after Martha was gone, there was no automobile section. Continuing on in the same vein, Martha's love of cars. Martha had started her career with reporting about the ongoings of high society. She'd moved on to automobiles, and she was absolutely fascinated. And every single picture that you are going to see now is from the era of Martha Root writing about cars, 1900 to 1903. So all of these cars are 1900 to 1903. So these cars were sometimes run with steam, like this one, or electricity like this one, or gas like this one. And every car was a new and exciting event. If you look closely at the top here, you see those little tasseled fringes? I mean, it's very cute, but probably got dirty very, very quickly with all the dirty air at the time. But I mean, it's like a little gem. It's such a gorgeous little gem. Each car had a new invention or innovation. Like this one right here has the windshield. I mean, that looks very dangerous because it's made of glass, probably broke every day. Automobiles in 1900 were like moving works of art and technology. Look at the gorgeousness. Look at this. The manufacturers and the drivers were pioneers. Martha was absolutely fascinated. She wrote her first article on automobiles on the 29th of June, 1901. And I'm going to actually read from that article because it's very interesting. She wrote about garages, about automobile manufacturers, the performances of various automobiles, road conditions and races, automobile shows. She wrote about driving routes because the roads were a huge issue because you have this new transportation and there are no roads. They had to build the roads around the cars. Various experiments with rubber materials for tires. And of course, like I told you, big deal, driving fashions. Because imagine you're driving and you have no windshield and you have no top. So if you have flies, they're not stopped by the windshield. They go into your eyes and nose and mouth. And the rain falls on your head. So you have to be your own windshield and you have to be your own car roof. So this is a 1901 de Dion Bouton motorette. Martha shared her passion of automobiles with her father. And when Titi Root came to visit her in Pittsburgh, she was such a star that the magazine, lent them a de Dion Bouton motorette, and a friend drove them around the city. The Index of Pittsburgh Life even bought an electric automobile for Martha to show their appreciation of her work in the new section. She was amazing. And she was a woman reporter on automobiles. I mean, such a novelty. So this is this first article that I was telling you about that Martha wrote. She wrote about a garage. Garages were completely new. I mean, imagine not knowing what a garage is. Imagine growing up in the 19th century and then all of a sudden you build houses for cars. That's what a garage is. So it was really novel. And this is what she wrote about in her first article for about cars. This is just an article about a garage. That's all it is. It's called the stable. And this is, so Martha, you have to know this, Martha is very cute. And she loves to get down with like the technical details. And it's so cute when she writes about technical stuff. It's just adorable. She's so good at it. And she's charming and she's careful and she's methodical. I would read from her technical articles all day long if I could. So the article is called Private Automobile Stables in Pittsburgh. So when you hear stable, think garage. So this is the article. It's a column and a half, but I'm going to just read you three short excerpts from three different parts of the article. The stable of Mr. Robert B. King on Negley Avenue, constructed in the summer of '99, was the pioneer stable, and later buildings do not surpass it. The owner, in looking for plans for an auto house, traveled extensively only to come home and design his own place. The structure is made of wood 9 by 16, and the doctor says if it was to be built again, he would make it 10 by 16 and put a bench for tools next to the south wall. However, the building is very comfortable as it is. The floor is of cement, pitched angled at one end, and furnished with a sewer pit so that the vehicle can be washed in the stable. The lighting of the stable is excellent. 2 large windows cover almost all of the 2 sides, and the electric lights are arranged with lamps on cords so that they may be carried to any part of the machine. Chapter 11, Martha in Paris. Third trip to Europe. Martha loved her job. She had finally found her vocation. She wasn't a principal anymore. She loved being a journalist, but she loved traveling more. So she approaches the steamer line, the Holland America line. And she offers to write articles about their ship in exchange for a free ticket. Then, once she has the free ticket, she goes to her editors and says, I have a free ticket. Can I go to Europe and write for a while? And of course, they agree. She's a star. She probably got them to sell so many more magazines. This is the Statendom that she sailed on in 1902 on the 15th of March. She's returning to Europe for the third time, 13 years after her first trip to Europe in 1889. Look at this. We have Martha Root on the ship manifest for the Statendom. So Martha wrote her first article as a foreign correspondent on the sailing journey from New York to Boulogne-sur-Mer, and it was called Outward Bound on a Dutch Liner, and it appeared in volume 7, number 341 of the index for Saturday, April 19th, 1902. There are so many pictures in this article. 3, 6, 9, there's 10 pictures. Martha describes in detail life aboard the ship, what they eat, how people occupy their time, the silly questions people ask the captain, and gorgeous pictures. Oh God, Martha is so amazing. So Martha got seasick during the trip, but ever the good journalist, she wrote about it. So she wrote about seasickness in this first article. The story will hardly be complete without its unpleasant side, seasickness. So here, to use the chief officer's call, alles klar, we found on board as many cures for seasickness as gulls on the ocean, ranging from hopeless resignation, champagne, and patent medicines, down to the nonsensical advice of putting a newspaper over the stomach. Martha is so fascinating. There's only one Martha Root. She was curious about everything. So she manages to get to the captain and get a tour of the engine room on a functioning steamship. The thing is, she had such an adorable personality. No one ever said no to Martha. And this is normally so dangerous, super off limits, but this is Martha getting technical about a steamship engine. Naturally, the most important part of any vessel is its propelling power, the engines. The chief engineer was studiously careful to take our party to the engine room in absolute calm weather so that no accident due to the motion of the ship could possibly occur. To speak technically of the ship for a moment, it is a twin screw steamer, 2 shafts each of 120 feet long and 16 inches in diameter, carrying a propeller 16 feet in diameter. The ship is propelled by 6,700 horsepower engines at a steam pressure of 180 pounds to the square inch. There are 6 enormous boilers under which 33 furnaces transform the fresh water supplied by an evaporator into steam. 140 tons of coal are daily consumed by these furnaces, which is why we have global warming now. Martha enjoyed the sailing journey and was very sad to see it end. This is Boulogne-sur-Mer. After a voyage very short, all too short, Boulogne, these are Martha's words. After a voyage all too short, Boulogne and the fact that the golden days of Aranjuez were over loomed in sight. In the distance, I saw the celebrated statue of Napoleon pointing toward England, Boulogne underneath, and the tender approaching our steamer to take off passengers for Paris. Le Quartier Latin, the Latin Quarter. After trying 2 hotels and an American-style bed and breakfast, Martha went through her list of 6 authentic French pensions, French bed and breakfasts, and picked the one run by Madame Aliou at 14 Rue Monsieur le Prince. Madame Aliou's was centrally located in the bustling Quartier Latin. Le Quartier Latin is one of the oldest parts of Paris, a center for learning and home to universities since the Middle Ages. This is the Sorbonne in 1530. Artists flourished in the Quartier Latin. They were drawn to its vibrant intellectual life, its absolutely charming cafes, its dinners and art galleries, and this is where Art Nouveau was born. This is where Cubism emerged 2 years before Martha settled into the pension. Martha was walking distance from some of the most important and amazing sites in Paris. Musée de Cluny, le Louvre, le Bon Marché. And of course, Martha would always love gardens, and she would write about them even in Paris. Martha was fascinated by gardens. This is her article's Paris Gardens, which includes 5 stunning photographs and talks about the Jardin du Luxembourg, le Jardin des Tuileries, le Parc de Montsouris, le Bois de Boulogne, talks about their origins, their creators, the types of Parisians that go to each of these different gardens. And she made the point, which is a really interesting thing to say, that yes, Pittsburgh also has gardens. But you know what the difference between Pittsburgh and Paris is? Paris's gardens are surrounded by extraordinary architecture. Pittsburgh is Steel City. So one of the articles that Martha wrote was Chez Madame Aliou, and she loved being there. She loved being in this bed and breakfast. It was all French people. And Madame Aliou's husband, Monsieur Aliou, was a librarian, and he brought all of the leading magazines so that Martha could be really immersed. And she had studied French too, so she was trying out her French. This is an AI image. Sorry, couldn't find anything else. Breakfast was served around noon, each person eating 6 to 8 tiny little homemade apple fritters sprinkled with powdered sugar. Most people woke up at 10 or 11, but Martha woke up early. And of course, because she's staying in a French pension with French people, and the French Madame Aliou is not happy with Martha. You Americans are terrible. You kill yourselves so early with work. Martha's 5th article from Paris was about Madame Aliou and her pension and the cosmopolitan residents and what they ate and when they had tea and Monsieur Aliou and Madame Aliou. And for those who might follow in her footsteps, Martha did something she always did and would do forever. She would give very practical advice. How much does this cost? How much does that cost? So she came to the conclusion that Paris isn't actually much more expensive than Pittsburgh if you know how to spend your money right. So Martha included a picture of a busy intersection with buses and 5 o'clock tea at Madame Aliou's. Martha also wrote about Sarah Bernard, La Bernard, the most famous French actress of her day. Martha Root attended a performance by Sarah Bernard in La Dame aux Camélias on May 10th, during the week of May 10th, 1901. This is a painting of Sarah Bernard in La Dame aux Camélias. Her performance was so exceptional that Martha Root wrote a beautiful article about her that was published in the index of 17th of May 1902. Martha wrote, "Last week, I heard Sarah Bernard in one of her greatest play, La Dame aux Camélias, sometimes called Camille. So wonderful is the power within this woman that I wanted to know a great deal about her. It is impossible to see her without being enchanted by her presence. The audience rises and shouts bravo with fury, and in another act, all the people in the house are sobbing." I would love to have known what it was like to be in that audience. I have never seen any actress so passionate and irresistible. One lives only in what she is playing and forget the whole world outside. She also wrote about the American Chamber of Commerce in Paris. On the 10th of May, 1902 issue of the Index, it was very useful information, very technical, I do not like economics, so I chose the least economic part of this article to share with you. But anyway, it's all about economy. It's kind of interesting, but my eyes glaze over when I read anything about budgets and things like that. So it was a very beautiful picture that she included of the members of the Chambers in Commerce. And then I found the only part of the article that I was willing to share with you. It's about one of my favorite things in the whole world. Another useful question to which the Chamber of Commerce has addressed itself is the desirability of adopting the metric system of weights and measures in America, a matter which is now, I believe, being favorably considered in Washington. I do not like the imperial system. Chapter 12, Martha and Cars. in France. So these are all her car articles in Paris. As an automobile editor, sure, Martha wrote about the Chamber of Commerce and gardens and Madame Aliouz and Sarah Bernhardt, but she spent most of her time with cars. Now, Martha first needed to gain entry into the world of automobiles because she was a woman and she was an American. So on her second day in Paris, Martha wrote her first feature on automobiles. So she was like establishing herself. She wrote an article about automobiles in Paris so that she could show this article to French people and say, look, I'm a bona fide automobile reporter. And it was a general observation of her, this article here is a general observation about automobiles in Paris. So Martha loved the Panard Levasseur, which she called the aristocrats of the pavement. This is a Panard Levasseur. And she mentions that all the articles in Paris have both canvas tops and glass windshields. Very interesting. Martha described how she had letters of introduction from important men in the automobile industry in the United States and from a newspaper editor in Pittsburgh with a note of introduction to Algernon Dougherty, the president of the American Journalist Society of Paris. Algernon left his work to show Martha around and introduced her personally to people, giving several of them his business cards as giving her several of his business cards as introduction to other journalists with a note written on the back that said, she is one of us, so I'm sure you'll help her in any way you can. The caravan from Paris to Nice. Now, so I'm very excited about this part because it just occurred to me the other day. Was this written about in France? And guess what? It was. This was a huge media event, and I found 100 photos of it. So all the photos you see here are all pictures of this event. So Martha published a fantastic and adrenaline-filled article in the Index of May 3rd, The Caravan from Paris to Nice, an interesting French event in which two American machines distinguished themselves. Always the smart journalist. She always brings in the hook for people who are in Pittsburgh. She's like, okay, yes, this is a very big race, but it has something to do with Americans. Now, guys, I'm almost done. I'm sorry. I know I went overboard. I apologize for that. So this is not the departure. This is them at a cafe, but I couldn't, the picture of the departure was just awful. So 40 automobiles left Place de la Concorde on May 30th. And Martha was in an 8-horsepower De Dion with 3 other people. This is an 8-horsepower De Dion from the race. I don't know if it's Martha's car. Look at the rims on this car. So beautiful. Look at the front of this car, how nice it is. And this is actually somebody on the race. This is such a cool picture. They went through Melun, Montreux, Sens, Torcy, Tonnerre, Montbard, Saint-Bernon, Dijon, Lyon, Avignon, and finally Nice, where they stopped. But there were 2 accidents early on in the race, but 20 out of the 40 cars made it. Then Martha raced from Versailles in a Berg automobile. And this was the highlight of her trip. It was a speed test with the creator of the car. And they left from Versailles. They left from the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and they went to Versailles. And they reached 80 kilometers an hour, 50 miles an hour at that time, which was huge. So her article was just filled with excitement. They went through, I mean, it's really worth a read. I am going to skip through the quote because I kind of went a little bit overboard with that quote. And Martha leaves Paris, but before leaving Paris, she goes to the Bois de Boulogne and she describes the cars right before leaving Paris. Automobiles of every description are to be seen in the Bois. And without entering into any technical description, I mention the gaiety of color, which is something to see. The spring models, or many of them, in white and gold, or in delicate grays or dazzling yellows, and every hue in the shade of green is also used. The majority of the machines are gray, but in the narrow white striping in a deeper tone, the deep reds are also in evidence. Now, Martha leaves Paris, and she returns to Pittsburgh at the end of May 1902. 7 months after returning from Paris, Martha and her characteristic energy and writing talent become noticed, and she gets a job with the Pittsburgh Gazette. Now, next week, we return to Pittsburgh with Martha, where she reports on the St. Louis Fair, moves on to covering society, becomes a Baha'i, and her life changes forever. Thank you all for coming today. And thank you all on YouTube for watching this. This is it for me today. See you next Sunday.